So that's why I came. I was invited and I came. But Tracy heard about a group going to Mississippi to help black people to register to vote. And he decided, these were a group of students, college kids from the North, and they were mostly white. And they decided to help the black people to register to vote because they had never been allowed to vote in Mississippi. So he joined them. He was a lot older than they were, because they were like 18 and 19, and he was 40. And he went down to Mississippi. First, he was going to be just an artist. He was an artist, and he was going to do illustrations of what this whole civil rights movement was about. But then when he got there, he found it so compelling and so interesting and important that he really got involved. And he began helping to drive people to the voting polls where they could register and then they could vote. And that was a very important thing to do. And this group of students from the North, including Tracy, were attacked by people in a group called the Ku Klux Klan, which was a group of very violent white people. But they decided not to fight back because Martin Luther King did not approve of violence and would not have approved of their resisting that way. So they got arrested.
Here's a picture just showing you. I'm going to interrupt with some
Please do, yeah.
Here's a picture of Martin Luther King being kind of harassed by a policeman. And look how peaceful is. He's just, what do you think his face is saying there? What, does anyone have any idea? What do you think he's feeling there? Nobody? Well, to me, it looks like he's saying, you can push me, but I'm not going to push you back. You're not going to make me violent. I'm going to keep peaceful. And that's what he did.
Yeah, it was very important.
Must have been hard, too, right?
I think it must have been very, very hard. And some of the students were arrested. Some of them had to go to jail. People up here in Westport raised money for bail money to get the students out of jail because they couldn't get any help from anybody. The police down there wouldn't help them. The newspapers wouldn't help them. Even the ministers, the churches, nobody would help them.
Even the President of the United States didn't really help them.
Not at first.
Eisenhower, yeah.
Not at first, right. But it turned out to be successful, that going to Mississippi and helping these people to register to vote, because the following year, well, this was 1964 and 65, and then they passed the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act in Congress, which gave people, everybody, no matter what color, the right to vote. So that was very, very important. And that's partly why we're celebrating this wonderful man today. He was an extraordinary man. He was tragic in a way, very tragic, really. He was only 39 when he was killed. And that's probably younger than some of your parents are. I'm sure it is. But he did a lot in his 39 years. He was very brave, he was very courageous, and he would not let these people who were attacking black people frighten him. He led marches, he went all over the country to talk to people wherever there was injustice going on, or lack of justice. He went to try to convince people that segregation was wrong. Do we all know what segregation means?
Raise your hand if you know what segregation means.
Can you explain it?
It's like when, it's like separated.
Yes,
That's right.
exactly. They separated black people from white people. Black people were not allowed to use the same restaurants, go to the same restaurants, the same hotels, the same swimming pools. They,
Bathrooms.
right, the same bathrooms. They weren't even allowed to drink out of the same water fountains,
Right.
which was a terrible thing. It was very sad.
They'd have 2 water fountains, whites only.
Colored only.
And
Colored.
Colored, right. They used to call black people colored,
Yeah.
which is crazy because we all have some color, right? Nobody's really white, are we?
No. We're just different shades.
That's right.
We're blonde.
Right.
There were even children that got involved. We had a lot of children getting involved. This is children not much older than you that were getting involved. And here's a girl, not a teenager, maybe the girl's age. And they arrested so many children that they'd get school buses and fill up the school buses in the South to take the children to jail. Can you imagine that?
No.
I bet the whole thing is hard for you guys to imagine because it's not like that now, is it? We have a long way to go, but...
Right.
That they discovered they were too young.
They were too young. Some of the children, yes.
Too
Yes.
young to go to jail, you mean?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't think they cared. See, look, here it is. This is the kind of water fountains they have. Can you imagine that? 2 different water fountains. And playgrounds. And bathrooms. Everything was
Right.
segregated.
Right. And schools, certainly. There were black schools and there were white schools, and the black schools didn't have nearly as many books or crayons or anything as the white schools did. So segregation was a very bad thing, and it was very unfair. That's what it really was. It was not fair. You all know about fairness, because we're all saying, that's not fair some of the time, right? Yeah. So this extraordinary man, who, as I said, was only 39 when he was killed in a tragic assassination, did a lot in his time. He traveled all over this country, wherever he knew that there was some sort of injustice or unfairness going on, and talked to people. He traveled some 6 million miles in his time, yes. And he spoke to 25,000 people. And he led marches.
And
That-
made a difference.
He made a difference.
Yes,
He really
right.
made a difference.
One person can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Can
And
you
we,
explain who the Freedom Riders were? The Freedom Riders?
well, they were a group of people from the North who decided to go down south and protest the segregation down south.
So Tracy was a Freedom Rider.
He was not a freedom rider. He was part of the student movement that went down in 1964 and 65
Okay.
to help register voters. That's really what they were doing. Because if you have the vote, then you can decide who should be the head of our country, who should be our congressmen, who should be our senators. And that was very, very important. And because black people were not allowed to vote, they could never have an opinion about who should be the head of our country. I doubt we would have a black president like Barack Obama. I'm sure we would not if the Freedom Riders and the students who went down south had not been able to do that, had not been able to register people to vote for who they wanted. Yes,
Isn't it dangerous, though, when they went to register? People
A-
tried to stop them. It
Absolutely.
wasn't as easy as we go in and register today at the town hall, right?
right.
Even marching was dangerous.
Marching was dangerous, registering was dangerous. They would ask people questions that nobody could have answered, like, how many laws are there, you know, in the Constitution? I mean, none of us could have answered questions that they were asked. And if they couldn't answer the question, then they were turned away. You're not eligible to vote.
But the white people didn't have to answer those questions.
Right.
They would sign them up, just the black people. So they made it really hard. They'd throw rocks at them and sometimes beat them up.
Oh, yes, a lot of people were beaten up, a lot of people were killed. And it was a very terrible
It's
time.
only because the color of their skin.
Exactly, exactly. That was the only reason.
can't
Well, I
imagine
had-
what that
I-
would be like.
Was gonna show them this picture. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Oh, that's such a touching picture.
This is a painting by Norman Rockwell, but it's taken from the news. I'm gonna pass out a couple. And you guys can look at them.
Did you see this, Kay?
And
Yes,
tell me
it's
what you think you
beautiful.
see going on here, okay? Tell me what you think you see,
What?
and Gloria's gonna talk a little bit about it. And then here's the real picture. You wanna see one of these, Henry? And then this is the real picture. This is the photograph that Norman Rockwell did from this picture that was in the news.
Going to school.
Norman Rockwell was a famous illustrator who did a lot of covers for magazines back in the day.
About American life, yes.
All right, guys. All right. Gloria's going to explain to you what these pictures are about. First, we have the news clipping. Okay, well, you can share. But do you want to talk about, because I picked this because that girl's just about your age. And does anyone have any idea what's going on in this picture? Yes, Jordy.
I know who it is.
Who is it?
Ruby Bridges.
Good job.
What did she
going
say?
on?
It's a
Ruby
black-
Bridges.
It's a black
Oh, good
girl
for you.
in a
Wow.
white school, and
Right.
they're kicking her out.
Well, they're not kicking her out. What happened was how did this come about? How did the girl get to go to the school?
Well, she had to be accompanied by, she had to be taken to the school by grown-ups, by adults, officials to escort her so that the people would not attack her. She was one little girl going all by herself, the first one, and she had to be protected from these people all around who would have attacked. They attacked with vicious dogs, they attacked with fire hoses, they attacked any way they could. And young black children like this little girl had to be protected in order to go to the school. Once schools were desegregated, that means there was no more segregation. The people in the South still didn't want the blacks going to their schools. So they had to be protected in order to go. And that's what this picture is about. One brave little girl. What was her name again? Ruby?
Bridges.
Good.
Good job.
Very
Now, if you look
good.
at the painting that
You just
Norman
learned
Rockwell
something.
did. What?
I just learned something.
Oh, I know. I always learn from them.
Right.
Now look at the painting, okay? What things in that painting did Norman Rockwell use to show the feeling going on there? You can see the newspaper clipping, and then you can see what he did with the painting. Look closely at the painting. Do you see the men's faces? No. Why do you think you don't see the men's faces? And also, what's on the wall behind Ruby? What is that? A tomato that somebody threw. And there's also, if you look very closely, there's some kind of hateful things on there. There was a group called the Ku Klux Klan.
Right.
You want to explain who they are?
Well, the Ku Klux Klan were terrible people.
Still around.
Yes, unfortunately. But they're no longer around the way they used to be. And they were down south. They wore white sheets to cover their faces because they didn't want anyone to know who they were. The sheets had holes for their eyes, had pointed caps on the top. And they used to lynch people. Lynching is a form of murder. They would catch a black man and hang him from a tree.
For no reason other than him being black.
Right.
Even teenagers.
Right, right. And when Tracy went south to Mississippi, this sort of thing was still going on. Among the people whom he went south with, he went with a lot of students, college students, were 3 young men from the north. Andrew Goodman, Andrew Schwerner Cheney, Jim Cheney.
Andrew Schwerner,
Does anybody remember their names?
Goodman, Cheney.
And Schwerner were their names. One of them, Jim Cheney, was black, the other two were white. These three young men, who were part of the group that Tracy went with, were captured by members of the Ku Klux Klan. And for days and days, nobody knew what happened to them. They were just gone, they were missing. And everybody was wondering, where are they? What could have happened to them? Did they get lost somewhere? Nobody knew. Finally, weeks later, their bodies were discovered in a dam. They had been killed by the Ku Klux Klan, which shows you how dangerous it was for these brave young students, including Tracy, to go to Mississippi. They knew how dangerous it was, and they went anyway. Tracy liked to say that he thought after the first indoctrination, when they were shown how to protect their bodies if they were attacked, there were certain ways they had to get down on the ground and cover their...
Because they couldn't fight back. They weren't allowed to fight back. They had to just protect themselves against being beaten up.
Right. And he thought after that first demonstration of how they had to protect themselves that some of these students would be calling their parents and saying, I want to come home, I don't want to do this, it's too scary. But nobody called home, nobody left. They all stayed all summer, and then they came back the following summer, and they did it all over again. And they lived with the black people. Segregation was such in Mississippi that the white people lived on one side of the highway and the black people lived on the other side of the highway. So all these students in Tracy lived with the black people on their side of the highway in these miserable little shacks, really, with no running water. If you wanted to take a shower, you had to get water from a well and boil it and, you know, wash yourself with the hot water. It was very uncomfortable. But all of them stayed, and then they came back the next summer to do it again.
Do you want to talk about the Woolworths counter?
The what? I'm sorry.
The Woolworth counter, the counter. at
Oh,
Woolworths?
that was part of the boycott, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Elizabeth, I think you'd better talk about
I don't know
that.
that much about it. The same kind of nonviolence. Martin Luther King actually had children who signed up, and it was called the Children's Crusade. And you had to have your mom and dad read it, and you had to have it signed, and it said that you promise to refrain from violence of fist, tongue, and heart.
Right.
So violence of your fist, of your words, and of your heart. And you had to walk and talk in a manner of love. And you had to sign it, and you had to have your mom and dad sign it. So a lot of children got involved, and I'll talk about the Woolworths, but look, here's a bunch of kids not much older than you being arrested. And here, they would take fire hoses and dogs and attack the kids too. You see the dog attacking the kids? So they didn't care if you were a kid, but a bunch of young college students had an idea. When you used to go to a lunch counter, like a diner, black people weren't allowed to sit at the counter. Can you imagine that? You weren't allowed, so I don't know, about 4 or 5 college students went into the Woolworths, which had and sat at the counter. They didn't say anything, they didn't do anything violent, and people went nuts. But that was their form of protest, civil disobedience.
They wanted to be served.
Right.
Greensboro, North Carolina.
Right.
I think you should get up and talk. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about his famous speech. And I'm just going to.
The I Have a Dream speech.
This is what I'm handing them right now, so they can.
Right. This is beautiful.
And you can tell about Tracy in the speech too. There's a
Yes,
story
I
about
will.
him. Here, you guys.
I will do that. This, of course, is one of the great speeches of our country, really. It's called the I Have a Dream speech. And he gave it in front of the Lincoln, this is Martin Luther King, gave it in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And hundreds of thousands of people, blacks and whites, a lot of whites, went to Washington to march and be there for this speech.
This is kind of like what one of the marches would look like. That's how many people, a lot more than that, but a lot of people were at the marches.
Right. And among the things he said in his I Have a Dream speech, I just want to read it to you because I wrote it down. Yeah. Tracy, of course, went to Washington, D.C. to hear this speech because everyone knew it was going to be important. And part of what he said, part of what Martin Luther King said was, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Does anybody want to explain what that means? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I like their personality
Right,
instead of their color.
right. And Tracy went to hear this speech because he knew how important it was going to be. He went early. He took his 2 children. He carried his daughter, Lori, on his shoulders and got all the way to the front of the Lincoln Memorial in order to hear the speech. Just as Martin Luther King got up to speak, a little old lady in the front, because it was very hot, it was in the summer.
It was August 28th.
I'm sorry?
August 28th.
August 28th. Okay, thank you. You can imagine how hot that is in Washington, D.C. This little old lady standing right in front of Tracy fainted from the heat. So he bent down to help her and to get her awake again, you know. By the time he stood up, everyone was applauding. The speech was all over. He never heard a word of it. He was so busy with this little old lady. But, of course, he knew the speech. He read it. He heard about it. And it was a very important speech. And I think it began to pave the way for what is really beginning to happen now. I think we're just at the beginning. And Martin Luther King Day is also a day of service. Among the things that Martin Luther King said was, if I can find it here, he said, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? So Martin Luther King Day is a day to do something for somebody else. Think about that.
That's your homework assignment.
Think about what you might be able to do for somebody else that would help them.
Does anybody have any questions? Anybody want to know anything about that time? No? Any?
What was Tracy's takeaway of that first summer in Mississippi? He was an artist, he drew pictures of
Right.
everything.
Well, he wrote his first book called Stranger at the Gates. He was the stranger at the gate. And that was very exciting. He had always been an artist. He'd never been a writer. But it turns out he was as good a writer as he was an artist. He wrote beautifully. And he wrote very much the same way he painted, with big, beautiful concepts and then very telling little details. And that was his first book. Then he wrote a book called My War, which is about his service in World War II when he landed on D-Day on the beach at Normandy. And then he wrote a book called We Had Sneakers, They Had Guns, which was also about the civil rights movement. The sneakers, of course, belonged to the students. The guns belonged to the Ku Klux Klan. And what a difference, you know, between those who could only walk or run and those who had guns pointed at them.
The guns were not just the Ku Klux Klan, the guns belonged to the police
That's right.
and the officials of the states.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Guns and the dogs and the fire hoses.
Right.
Right, right. Tracy said that being in Mississippi was scarier than being on the beach at Normandy because there was no protection. The police wouldn't protect you. The sheriffs wouldn't protect you. The people wouldn't protect you. The newspapers wouldn't do anything. The government wouldn't do anything. Nobody would help. So it was a pretty scary place. But Mississippi's improving a lot. I was down there with Tracy several times, and things are different. There is no more segregation. People are not treated as well as they could be. Black people are not treated as well as they should be. But it is still a much better place than it was in 1964 and 65.
Well, I'm sure they have a hard time even wrapping their brain around this. It's so dramatically different than they've
Well,
grown up with, thank goodness.
right, right. And I hope each one of you will do something today and tomorrow and the next day that is good for somebody else. Because that's what Martin Luther King had hoped this would be.
And nonviolent.
And nonviolent,
Remember
of
to stay
course,
always
yeah.
peaceful, right?
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, what do we say to Mrs. Sugarman? Thank you very much.
Thank you for letting me come. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you. And I applaud you.